Professor Hausmann had a chart that showed the growing wage gap between higher educated and lower educated folks. And one of the things that was sort of interesting is that if you look at the last few years, every single line was going down. And so if you sort of marry that concept with the last point, which is the sort of whole way that the algorithmic, I'm not going to pronounce it right, but the way that computing power is starting to accelerate, is there any way in which we're not going to sort of end up with a sort of massive hollowing out of the labor force where I think it's Mark Andreessen said the world's going to sort into two buckets, a very narrow slice of people
Right.
who give orders to the robots, and then the vast majority who take the orders from the robots and get paid very low wages. So how does it play out when you think about Moore's Law and that this stuff is doubling in power every 18 to 24 months?
Ricardo, why don't you handle the first law? I'll come in.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's a good hypothesis for what may happen in the U.S. going forward. But I'm not sure that it's a good hypothesis of what's going to happen in developing countries. Because I think in developing countries, part of the threat in the U.S. is the fact that more of the labor market, more of the tasks are becoming accessible in developing countries, so that in some sense the globalization of value chains has transformed, if you want, trade in words for trade in syllables. And so now more countries can get into the business of producing a syllable while they still have few letters, and that's what's making it difficult for, say, the American middle class. So my guess is that the hollowing out of the American middle class might have kind of positive effects in the rest of the world, because in part it will be a consequence of the relocalization of activities that from the point of view of developing countries are higher productivity activities than the ones that they're currently doing. So I think that from that perspective, it's going to play itself out very differently in the North and in the South.
I guess my real quick view of it is this going to be probably a tough decade or two for lots of folks in developed countries, John, for all the obvious reasons which on that. And I think it is good news for developing countries. I mean, India it has such high internal variance with an amazing business class. We talked about this last night over dinner. Very capable people, and yet it's a country of 1 billion plus people, and there's 70 million kids who can't read right now in India. Bringing education to them through whatever remote mechanism is going to be very helpful. But it is going to have an impact upon the U.S. and elsewhere. But what I'm more interested in is actually, I think Sandel's issue about the market. I didn't agree with everything he said last night, but down the issue, do you really want a market where everyone is priced exactly to their marginal contribution? And that is what is so powerful right now in the U.S. And this dynamic pricing, the ability to figure out what you're able to pay for exactly this item, is soaking up the surplus potentially, and then who shares these issues, rather than something which used to work in terms of a firm itself would be a community which there was some equality of pay which was delivered to people. And that notion of community as the firm, which was so important, I think is gone. It's not only gone in this country, it's in Germany as well, because there's huge sorting of high-quality firms, high-quality workers, low-quality firms, low-quality workers. So the disparity of income is quite large. Those things are what troubles me.
Judge, thanks so much for this. This is a hypothesis I'd like to get the benefit of your thoughts on. It seems to me that one very simple, low-hanging fruit opportunity for the developing countries that you advise is to identify promising new industries with the most onerous regulatory environments in the US and the EU, and to advise them to deliberately create more friendly regulatory environments in their country.
Right.
And I can offer three specific examples. One is autonomous aerial devices, drones, which purportedly are being disallowed here by the FAA because we have so many private aircraft relative to other countries. But whatever the reason, I understand most of the drone production is already outside of the US rather than here. Another example, neurogaming devices. I recently went to a conference where these devices, which you wear on your head, and they measure various signals from the brain while you're playing games, and those signals enter into the gameplay in some fashion. The investors and entrepreneurs said if your game measures any physiological metric, don't publish it for fear that your game will be regulated by the FDA. That too is an opportunity, it seems to me, for a developing country. And third, prosthetic robotics. Here, because of the requirement for ramps everywhere, there, I suspect, is less investment in prosthetic robotics than there could be that actually enable people to step over curves and curbs. Then, so as in other countries, they would benefit from that. What are your thoughts on this general approach? Thank you.
Is this to me or to Ricardo or the panel? Or? So real quickly, the, innovations are wonderful. You know, Ricardo talks about innovations being the key to this. But they also are threatening. Some of these things may not be threatening. But I will say something. This is something which I think Ricardo will agree with here. Is that it's nice to have a economic ideology which is true everywhere in the world, where regulations are not imposing, et cetera, and so on. And that makes it easier to trade. It makes it easier to do investment. It makes it easier to do a bunch of stuff. And it's not clear to me that is going to work for this issue of surplus, of fairness, going over the next decades. I'm sure to me, economically, it's a good thing. And one reason why is we really have very bad theories. So Ricardo's kind of arbitraging economics by saying economics is like really sucks at doing this the technology stuff. It's true, it was really bad. Here's a better way of thinking about it. But you can also say economics is really bad by thinking about what the state. It has really bad theories of the state. So let's have better theories of the state on regulation. How do you regulate? How do you create value for an economy, et cetera? And I think that's where the name of the game is. It's probably still at a tacit knowledge, go to Albania sort of place. You have to import Ricardo to do this. But I do think there's probably a lacking in terms of what governments can do. So I don't want to be a techno, fearing person on this. I think there's a lot of benefit here. But I think we do need to have an alternative view of what regulation should be, of how to, and not only how to share the surpluses through gains, but how to make more people complements to these technologies. They're not just substitutes. I mean, I think this is the right language. I just don't think we've worked it out as a convincing story to counter all the other BS which is in the world about what governments should do and should not do.
So let me take a crack at the same question. I often tell policymakers, whenever you have a meeting with other government officials from other countries, look at their feet. Because most countries shoot themselves in the foot, right? And every country that shoots itself in the foot is an opportunity for you, For example, the US has a really, really, really dumb immigration policy. And the Canadians have figured it out. So, it's very hard to get an H-1B visa in the US. So, the Canadians will develop, will eat a lot of the lunch that could have been eaten in Seattle or in Oregon and so on, because, Vancouver is right next door and so on. So there's many ways in which you want to think of things that create market opportunities that are being restricted for the incumbents think that they're secure in their position, so they're not that worried, and they shoot themselves in the foot. But I'm also amazed at the degree to which developing countries shoot themselves in the foot. Everybody talks about the US immigration policy. It's fantastic compared to the immigration policy of most developing countries. Most developing countries have a harder time for people to move into it or to move into jobs. For example, in this university, 75% of the professors are foreign-born at Harvard. Even though Harvard had the ability to choose out of 300 million US-born. But it's 75% foreign. You go to any country, what's the percentage of foreigners in their universities? It's either because they don't get visa, or it's because actually Italy was forced by the European Union to allow non-Italian professors, right? So there are many areas in which developing countries shoot themselves in the foot, especially in areas that are related to some of the knowledge diffusion ideas that I was circulating. Shole.
Just very quickly, one of the challenges we see, especially in Africa, is as the reforms take place across sectors, there's a huge skills gap between what the educational systems are producing and what the various sectors and industries need. And so there's lots of focus on reform, so that in Nigeria, for instance, where we've gone through a privatization process in the power sector, so now it's been privatized. There are no engineers. There, a huge skills gap, which ultimately slows down growth in that sector, and there's not enough focus put by the advisors, the policymakers, etc., to ensure that the amount of effort focused on the actual privatization or reform in this sector is matched by investment in the educational system to ensure that you actually have a skilled workforce to deliver on the reform. So I don't know whether there are any emerging market scenarios where they've done it better and we can learn from. Thank you.
So let me very quickly get back to it, saying the following. Here there is a serious problem of miscommunication between what business people say and what government officials hear. Business people say we have a skills shortage, and government officials hear we have a schooling problem or a school quality problem. We have to upgrade our schools. We have to improve our schools. We have to, it's schools. And schools just don't teach electricity. Schools don't teach how to run an electricity company. So the skills shortage that you're finding is the lack of something other than schools. Now, it would be, we're all in favor of better schools, higher quality schools, but that's not where these letters are being generated. This diversity of letters is being generated. So that's why the Germans are so focused on vocational training, on lowering the distance between training outfits and on-the-job training, and considering business as partners in the co-development of skills in workers, in understanding how it is that the skills get accumulated and recognized through certification of what a worker knows, so that he can move around and capture some of the surplus because the market recognizes that he possesses some skills, and so on. So I think that by bringing engineers from outside, and maybe finding them, if they marry and they stay and then their children stay, that has been a very important way in which knowledge moves into countries and then gets replicated in countries once people are there. So I think that too much of the reaction that people have when they hear skill shortages is education. And I just think that that's not exactly what they should be hearing.